I'm Vanessa, 33, and my father sent me a letter that read, "Don't come to my retirement." No explanation, no kindness, just those 7 words like a slap across the face. And here's the twist. I'm the reason he ever had a pension to retire on in the first place. I built the $1 million business he used to get rich, and I removed his name from it the same week he told me I wasn't welcome. People think revenge is loud. Mine was surgical, strategic, silent. He wore his military stripes like armor, but at home, he treated me like a forgotten recruit. I spent years building a life, hoping he'd one day salute me with the same pride he gave strangers. Instead, he sent a letter that tore the last thread holding us together. So I did something most daughters wouldn't dare. I erased his legacy from the company he co-founded, pulled the branding he loved, rewrote the board structure, and quietly transferred the shares to myself. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just signed a paper. If you're yet to subscribe, hit that button. If he didn't want me at his ceremony, he wouldn't be at the top of my empire. Now, let me tell you how it all began. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address, no stamp. Just a hand-delivered message slid under the door of my downtown office. At first, I thought it was a bill or maybe a note from one of our vendors. I nearly tossed it aside without opening it, but the handwriting stopped me. Rigid, slanted, unmistakably his, my father's. I hadn't spoken to him in 6 months. Our last conversation had been stiff and short, a one-word answer kind of call after my assistant told me he'd phoned the office. He didn't ask how I was. He never asked, just wanted to know if the quarterly earnings were on track, and then hung up after I said yes. No goodbye. The envelope trembled in my hand, but I forced it open and pulled out the single sheet inside. Typed, formal, cold. Vanessa, please do not attend my retirement ceremony this Saturday. This is not a family event. I appreciate your understanding. That was it. No love, Dad. No explanation. No invitation. Just don't come. I sat still for a long time. My fingers gripped the paper like it might disintegrate if I let go. I read it again and again. Something burned in my throat. Shame? Anger? I didn't know. He didn't want me there. The man I had spent years trying to impress, to make proud, had just made it clear. I didn't belong in his final chapter. Not even in the audience. He used to say the military was his life, that duty came before everything. I used to think that included me, that if I worked hard enough, built something big enough, maybe I could earn a salute from him too. My business, my brand, our shared last name on the company logo, it had all been for him. But that letter shattered whatever illusion I had left. I folded it once, then again, until it disappeared into the smallest square I could make it. I slipped it into my desk drawer, closed it, and didn't cry. I refused to. I had been taught not to. But something broke that day, not loudly, not with screams or shattered glass, quietly, inside. By sunset, I was already on the phone with my lawyer, not to sue, not to confront, just to ask one simple question. How fast can we remove his name from the business paperwork? I didn't wait for his ceremony. I gave myself my own, and this was just the beginning. The night after I read the letter, I didn't sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling of my high-rise apartment, hearing his voice in my head. Not soft, not affectionate, just clipped commands like I was one of his soldiers. I remembered being 12, watching him come home in uniform, polished boots, eyes straight ahead, never looking down to notice the daughter reaching for him. He'd march past, kiss my mother with a stiffness that didn't belong in a marriage, and disappear into his study without a word. Even then, I knew he loved control more than connection. Maybe that's why I started the business, not for money, not even for freedom, but for validation. I needed to prove to him that I was worth seeing, that even without camouflage and medals, I could build something that mattered. So at 22, I started with nothing but a laptop and a half-baked idea in my dorm room, an app for veteran-owned small businesses to connect with one another. It was clunky, it was glitchy, but it was mine, and it was for him. At first, he ignored it. Then, once it started gaining traction, he began to acknowledge it, sparingly. One-word compliments. Impressive. Solid. Professional. Each one felt like a trophy. When the app got its first investor, I put his name on the paperwork. He didn't ask for it. I offered it, hoping that sharing ownership would finally make us partners in more than just blood. that maybe, just maybe, it would make him proud. We scaled quickly. From a website to a platform, from a 2-person team to 20 employees, then 100. Government contracts started coming in, veteran affairs offices signed up nationwide, the revenue hit 7 figures. We made the cover of a business magazine. He framed it and hung it in his office, but not a word of congratulations ever came my way. Still, I took that silent gesture as affection. I convinced myself it was his way of saying, I see you. But after the letter, that illusion collapsed like wet paper. All those years of sacrifice, sweat, canceled vacations, sleepless nights, none of it earned me a seat at his final moment in uniform. I realized then that I had mistaken proximity for love and silence for pride. I had been trying to buy a father's love with success, and it never worked. As dawn rose over the skyline, I stared out the window and saw the city I had built a name in. A name I had attached to a man who never wanted to share the stage. I whispered to no one, I built this to honor you. But honor means nothing when it's never returned. That morning, I told my lawyer to begin the process. My father would wake up to his big day. I would wake up to a bigger one, the day I began to reclaim everything I once gave away for his approval. The business, the name, the power, and soon the story. As the paperwork moved swiftly through legal channels, I found myself thinking less about the company and more about the house where all this started. A modest 2-story in Fort Benning, Georgia, where every room felt like it was under inspection. My father ran that house the way he ran his platoons, rigid schedules, enforced silence, and consequences for the smallest infractions. Shoes had to be lined up perfectly at the door. Beds had to be made with corners so sharp you could bounce a coin off them. Even our dinner conversations followed structure. No interrupting, no nonsense topics, just school, current events, or complete silence. My mother tried to soften it, placing flowers on the table, sneaking glances at me with her eyes that begged me to play along. But even her presence wasn't enough to mute the undercurrent of control that buzzed through our walls. He was respected on the base, decorated, feared. When he walked into a room, soldiers stood straighter, but at home, that authority translated into something colder. I was raised more like a recruit than a daughter. Mistakes weren't corrected. They were punished. I remember one time I forgot to bring in the mail. He made me stand outside with my school books until sunset. Discipline, he said. Responsibility. I was 11. No matter how hard I tried to please him, it was never enough. He wasn't cruel with fists, just with distance, with the absence of warmth, with the silence that taught me I had to earn my place in his world. My mother passed away when I was 16, a quiet heart attack in the kitchen while I was doing homework upstairs. I remember coming down to get a snack and finding her on the floor, her hand still clutching a towel. He never spoke much about that day, just planned the funeral and returned to work the next morning. I cried in my room for hours. He knocked once, told me to pull it together, and walked away. After she died, it got worse. The house went quieter. He stopped even pretending to ask how I was doing. I ate alone most nights. My senior year, I got a scholarship to a top university. He didn't show up at the award ceremony, just left a post-it note on the fridge. Good work. I carried all of that into adulthood, the need to be seen, to be praised, and when the business began to succeed, I truly thought it might be the bridge between us. I thought that if I wore the armor of achievement, he'd finally salute me the way he did his soldiers. But now, with that letter still folded in my drawer, I saw it all clearly. I was never in uniform enough for him, never sharp enough, quiet enough, obedient enough. His version of love had conditions, and I had finally stopped qualifying. The house I grew up in may be gone now, but the way it shaped me remained, and it was time I started unlearning what it taught. After my mother died, something in the house collapsed that had nothing to do with walls or furniture. It was as if all the color drained out of it. The curtains stayed closed longer. The radio stopped playing. Her voice, once the only warm sound that ever softened my father's sharpness, was gone, and with it, any remaining sense of comfort. I remember standing in the doorway of their bedroom the morning after the funeral. My father was already dressed in uniform, his boots perfectly laced, his face unreadable. He didn't look at me, just adjusted his collar and said, "The world keeps moving, Vanessa. You should too." That was it. No hug. No explanation, no shared grief. I was 16 and trying to mourn a mother while living with a man who treated emotions like weaknesses. That year, I learned how to cry into pillows and walk silently through a house filled with unspoken things. He never mentioned her again, not even when I brought her up. I tried once, 2 months later, to ask him about how they met. He stared at me for a second and then said, "Some things are private." He went back to reading his file and left me standing there with 1,000 unsaid questions stuck in my throat. School became my escape. I joined every club I could just to stay out of the house longer. I stayed late in the library, volunteered on weekends. The less time I spent at home, the less I had to measure myself against a silence that always felt like judgment. He didn't come to my science fair, even though I won first place. Didn't attend my theater debut, even though I had the lead. He showed up to my high school graduation only because his commanding officer's son was in the same class. He shook the officer's hand, nodded at me from across the field, and left before I even threw my cap. I started to wonder if grief had turned him colder, or if he had always been that way, and my mother had simply been the buffer between us. Her presence, gentle and subtle, had shielded me from the full blast of his emotional vacancy. Once she was gone, the coldness moved in completely. Still, I kept trying. I sent postcards from college, called every Sunday, left voicemails. He never called back. When I got my first internship, I mailed him a printed photo of my office badge. No response, but I never stopped hoping for one, not even when I knew better. I think every child, no matter how old, still wants to be acknowledged by their parent, even if it's only once. Now, sitting in the empire I had built, reading that letter again, I realized he had done the same thing he always did. Withdrew, silently, without explanation. Only this time, I wasn't a teenager anymore, and I wasn't willing to shrink for his silence ever again. I told myself I wasn't going to attend the retirement ceremony. I told my assistant to cancel the hotel and shred the RSVP. I told my therapist that I was done chasing validation. But on the morning of the event, I found myself staring at the dress I'd bought weeks before. Pale blue, soft neckline, professional, respectful, nothing flashy. The kind of dress a daughter wears when she wants to be taken seriously, when she still, despite everything, hopes her presence might mean something. I arrived late. The ceremony had already begun. The base was buzzing with decorated officers, their families standing tall beside them, some with toddlers on their hips, others with framed photographs of service memories. It was a sea of medals and speeches and stories. My father stood near the front, in full dress uniform, posture immaculate, the edges of his medals catching the sun. He looked like a man being honored by a world that understood him. I stayed toward the back, behind a row of civilians, keeping my presence quiet. I didn't want to steal attention. I only wanted one moment, one glance, one nod. When they called his name, the crowd rose. He took the stage, gave a sharp salute, and began his speech. He thanked his commanding officers, his colleagues, even a few soldiers by name who had served under him for less than a year. But he never mentioned me, not once. He didn't even scan the crowd. He read his words like a man filing a report, efficient, orderly, detached. I stayed until the applause ended, until the final handshake, until the last photo was taken. Then I stepped forward thinking maybe, just maybe, he'd see me, that my presence would move something in him. But when his eyes met mine, there was no recognition. Or worse, there was, and he chose not to acknowledge it. He simply turned to speak to another officer, his back to me like a closing door. I stood frozen, the dress I'd chosen suddenly feeling too bright, too hopeful. Around me, fathers embraced daughters, retirees posed with families. Laughter rippled through the air like the ceremony had unclenched their stiff pride into something human. But for me, there was nothing, no word, no gesture, no salute. On the drive home, I didn't cry. I clenched the wheel until my knuckles burned and replayed every moment. How easy it had been for him to ignore me. How natural. That was the moment I knew something had shifted. I wasn't just disappointed, I was done. That night, I called the board meeting, not out of spite, but out of clarity. My company bore his name and my fingerprints, but from now on, only one of us would own its future. And this time, it wouldn't be the man who couldn't salute the daughter who built the podium he stood on. After the ceremony, I waited. I don't know what I expected. A follow-up call, a half-hearted apology, maybe even a text. Something to acknowledge that he had seen me, that he knew I had shown up despite being told not to. But the silence stretched like an old wound splitting open. I checked my phone more times than I care to admit. I refreshed my inbox. Nothing. That's when I realized he'd meant it. The letter wasn't a moment of stress or oversight. It was intentional, cold, final. And yet, those 7 words haunted me more than any argument we'd ever had. Please do not attend my retirement ceremony. They weren't just a request. They were a declaration. The most direct communication he'd given me in years, and it came with a command to stay away. Not a conversation, not an explanation, just a line that sounded more like an order in a field report than a message from a father to his only child. I reread the letter in my office the next morning, alone before the staff arrived. My name printed so neatly, his signature at the bottom, not even signed in pen, but digitally typed like he couldn't be bothered to touch it himself. It was the kind of message that left no room for dialogue, no space for confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a boundary, one I never agreed to, but had been forced to obey my entire life. The irony stung deeper than the words. For decades, I'd lived under his silence, wishing he would say something, anything. I would have taken criticism, advice, even disappointment, just to hear his voice aimed at me with intent. But he'd always kept his emotions behind a wall. And now, after all that waiting, the first real statement I received from him was a rejection. I thought about the long hours in my early 20s, building a business from scratch, envisioning the moment I could call him and say, "We made it." I imagined him showing up at our launch party, finally proud, but that never happened. What did happen was a neatly typed letter that told me I didn't belong in his ending, as if I had never been part of his beginning. I folded the paper again and placed it back in the drawer, but this time it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like permission. Permission to stop waiting. Permission to stop begging a man who never planned to see me. His silence after Mom died had been a wound, but this letter, it was closure. And if he had the right to write me out of his life in a few dry lines, then I had the right to remove his name from the company I built. His retirement was his legacy. Mine would be my own, and this time I would write the letter, with ink, with action, and with the kind of clarity he never gave me. 2 days after I decided to remove his name from the business, I got a text from a number I hadn't saved. It was short, almost hesitant. "Vanessa, it's Adam. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a moment, surprised. Adam, my half-brother, the son from his first marriage, the one he never talked about, the one I'd only met 3 times growing up, always under awkward circumstances, always introduced like a distant cousin rather than family. He was 7 years older than me, and our lives had barely touched. Still, something about the timing made me pause. I responded, "Sure, when?" We met at a coffee shop near the harbor. He looked tired, like someone who had carried too many things for too long. There was a nervous energy about him, like he was finally doing something he had been afraid of for years. We sat down, and before I could even ask why he reached out, he said, "I heard about the letter." I nodded. The anger had dulled by then, but the disappointment still sat under my skin like a bruise. "He meant it," I replied flatly. Adam didn't argue. He just took a breath and said, "He's always meant it." Then he told me the truth. About how Dad had been the same with him, maybe worse. How he had spent his entire childhood trying to earn the same kind of acknowledgement I had chased for years. He told me about birthdays missed, college scholarships unmentioned, his wedding where Dad had RSVP'd yes and never shown. "I thought maybe it was me," he said, eyes cast down. "But then I saw him do it to you too, and I realized he only shows up when he's the one being honored." That sentence broke something open in me. It wasn't just personal, it was patterned, intentional. Our father didn't lack the capacity to care. He just reserved it for moments where he could stand in the spotlight. Everything else, parenthood, connection, responsibility, was secondary. Adam reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He asked me to co-sign some legal paperwork last year. Something about shares. I read the fine print before signing, and guess what? He'd given himself full decision-making power over the company's future without telling you. My heart sank. He was planning to sell it, Vanessa, after his retirement. I sat, frozen. The betrayal expanded from emotional to legal. My business wasn't just my legacy, it was my lifeline. And now I understood why he had kept me distant. He wasn't just uninterested. He was planning a quiet exit with my company folded neatly into his final act. I looked at Adam. For the first time in years, I felt less alone in the damage. 2 children from 2 chapters of his life, both carrying the same unanswered questions. I reached for the envelope and said, "Then it's time to finish what he started, only this time on my terms." Before I knew the truth about the letter or the betrayal buried in the fine print, I had believed, naively maybe, that the business could be the bridge between us. I remember the first time I pitched the idea to him. I had just finished my graduate program, energized and full of strategy, with a prototype in hand and spreadsheets of projections. I drove down to his base on a sweltering summer afternoon, thinking that this would be the moment everything shifted. That maybe, for once, I wouldn't be the daughter fighting for space in his periphery. I'd be the partner he never saw coming. He was in his office, stiff-backed and unreadable, the way he always was. I showed him the platform mock-ups, laid out the Veterans Network model, and explained how I wanted to use a portion of our eventual profits to fund job placement for retired soldiers. I thought it would touch something in him, that it would speak to his values. Instead, he leaned back, folded his arms, and asked, "What makes you think this'll work?" I kept my tone steady, my hands still. "Because it's needed," I said. "Because these men and women come back home and feel forgotten. Because no one else is doing it quite like this." He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He didn't even reach for the materials I printed, but he said something that gave me false hope. "Let me think on it." The next day, I got a call from his aide saying he'd agreed to co-sign the business documents and allow me to use his connections in exchange for minor equity. I saw it as a silent approval. I told myself he believed in me, just didn't know how to say it out loud. I didn't realize then that it wasn't belief. It was strategy. He was aligning himself with something he thought might succeed, but only if it made him look good. We co-founded the business on paper, but I built it in practice. Every early investor, every long night, every crash and relaunch, I was there, bleeding it forward. He showed up once to a private meeting with a retired general who later funded our expansion. That day, he took a photo with me in front of our logo. It was the only picture of us together since my high school graduation. I kept that picture on my desk for years, but looking back now, I see the truth in it. He's smiling, not at me, but for the camera, for the press release, for the legacy he wanted to curate. I thought the pitch was going to draw us closer. I thought we were building something together. But now, after Adam's confession and that letter still folded in my drawer, I realized I wasn't pitching a business. I was offering him a lifeline to connection, and he never once reached for it. I built a bridge, and he set fire to it while I was still standing on it. I should have seen it coming. The way he always positioned himself as the authority even when he hadn't earned it. After the pitch, after the photo, after he quietly accepted equity without ever attending a single staff meeting, I noticed a shift. Subtle at first. He started mentioning a name I didn't recognize during our rare phone calls, a Colonel Briggs. At first it sounded harmless. "Briggs could help open doors," he said once. "He knows the right people." I nodded, grateful even, still trapped in that hopeful space where a daughter confuses crumbs for affection. But then came the week I was finalizing our second seed round. I was meeting with potential partners, drafting proposals, and preparing to expand into a new market. I sent my father a briefing document just as a courtesy, something I'd never needed to do but still did out of habit. 2 days later, I got an email from a friend in the military contracting space. He forwarded me a pitch deck that looked eerily similar to mine. Same branding tone, same veteran outreach model, but at the top of the deck it said, Veteran Link Solutions, co-founded by Colonel Briggs and Lieutenant Colonel Everett Monroe. My father. I stared at the screen for several minutes, my hands numb. I clicked through the pages. There were entire paragraphs lifted from my work, charts that looked like they were copied and slightly reworded. They'd even used the same color scheme. It was like watching someone rob your house, rearrange the furniture, and throw their name on the mailbox. I called him immediately. He didn't answer. I texted, "Did you give my pitch to Briggs?" No reply. Not then, not ever. I knew he hadn't thought I'd find out. He lived in a world where favors were traded behind closed doors, where rank trumped loyalty. To him, I wasn't his daughter. I was a young civilian with a decent idea, one he felt entitled to redirect for his own benefit. Maybe he thought I wouldn't mind. Maybe he thought success would blind me to the betrayal. But this wasn't just business. It was mine. It had come from pain, from late nights, from desperation to matter to him. I sat in my office and reread the original pitch deck. Every word I had agonized over, every sentence I'd rehearsed in front of the mirror before sharing it with him. And now it was being paraded under a different banner, attached to two names that never stayed up past midnight coding the first prototype. I thought about the picture on my desk, us in front of the logo, and reached for it. Slowly, I turned it face down. That was the moment I stopped waiting for an apology. I didn't need his validation anymore. What I needed was clarity. He had crossed a line. He didn't just ignore me, he used me. And if he thought I was going to sit quietly while he profited off the very thing I built from the ground up, he was about to learn something he never taught me: how to fight back. After I saw the stolen pitch deck, something inside me snapped into focus. The fog of loyalty that had kept me tethered to him finally lifted. I stopped answering his calls. I stopped sending updates. I stopped hoping. I turned inward, back to the version of myself that had once sat in a tiny apartment with nothing but a laptop and an idea. If he wanted to replicate my blueprint, fine, but he'd always be 2 years behind. Because while he was presenting old slides, I was already building the next version. I took every betrayal and poured it into the work. I rewrote the software, streamlined the platform, and built out a new feature that allowed retired veterans to mentor active duty service members transitioning into civilian life. That feature alone tripled our user base. I brought in 2 consultants, both women, both military spouses, who had been overlooked by every other agency I knew. Their ideas reshaped our marketing strategy, and our story began spreading in quiet, powerful waves across bases and forums. Within 6 months, we closed our biggest government contract yet. The morning the wire hit our account, I stared at the screen. $20,000. Our first million, and none of it had his fingerprints on it. I leaned back in my chair, the sunlight pouring through the windows of our expanded office space, and I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt quiet. Still. Not empty, but full of something deeper than pride: relief. I had done it without him. Every ounce of pressure I had once placed on earning his approval was gone, replaced by the unshakable truth that I didn't need a single word from him to validate what I had accomplished. Of course, the headlines came next. Veteran start breaks 7 figures. Young CEO disrupts military support tech. Suddenly, we weren't the underdogs anymore. Investors started calling instead of the other way around. Features ran in online magazines. One afternoon, a producer from a national business show reached out asking for an interview. I accepted, but on one condition: no mention of my father. I was rewriting the narrative now. This was no longer the company I had built hoping to earn a father's pride. This was mine, fully. I changed the logo that week. Subtly, but meaningfully. I removed the eagle he'd insisted on. I replaced it with an open path leading into a sunrise. The change didn't make headlines, but it was the most personal rebrand I'd ever done. He tried to reach out once after that, a voicemail, calm, almost polite. Heard the news, congrats, let's talk soon. I deleted it without listening to the rest. That was the final time he used his voice to try to reach into something he no longer had access to. The empire I had built was no longer a gift to a man who never wanted it. It was a declaration. I didn't need his name on it. I only needed mine. And now, it was the only name that mattered. It was late October, just days after the press release announcing our expansion had gone live, when I received a package with no return address. At first, I thought it was a congratulatory gift from a partner, or maybe a token from a client who appreciated what our platform had done for them. But the handwriting on the envelope was too familiar, neat, composed, almost military in its precision. I opened it slowly, already bracing myself for something I didn't know how to feel. Inside was a simple birthday card. No glitter, no message pre-printed in gold. Just a plain white card with an American flag on the front and a handwritten note inside. 3 lines. Happy birthday, Vanessa. I know I've missed a few. Hope you're well. Dad. I stared at it for a long time. Not because it was touching, not because it changed anything, but because it was so eerily on brand. An effort that arrived too late, carried too little, and cost him nothing. It was the first birthday message I had ever received from him as an adult. And even now, after everything, it felt like a transaction, a move, a toe in the door he had slammed shut himself. I turned the card over, looking for something more, a postscript, a memory, a reason, but there was nothing, just the weight of those 3 sentences sitting like cold metal in my hand. It wasn't a gesture of reconciliation, it was damage control. He had seen the articles, the money, the press, and suddenly, he remembered I existed. I set the card on my desk and walked away. For hours, it stayed there untouched. At some point, one of my assistants knocked on the door, saw it, and asked if I wanted to keep it for the archives. I almost laughed, as if this card, this feeble attempt at a connection, deserved a place among contracts and client success stories. I told her no. I said to toss it. But then, as she picked it up, I stopped her. Actually, I said, give it to legal, keep the handwriting on file. Because now I understood the game. My father didn't reach out to heal. He reached out to mark territory, to make it seem, just barely, like he was part of my narrative. And I wouldn't let that happen. Not quietly, not through a birthday card that arrived 2 decades too late and 3 betrayals too deep. I scanned a copy for my records, then had the original filed away with the same precision he used to organize his medals. It wasn't nostalgia, it was evidence. Not for court, but for memory. For when the next person asked why I made the choices I did, he didn't miss a few birthdays, he missed all of them, and now, with one cheap card, he thought he could undo the silence. But you don't get to erase absence with a signature, not when the ink dries on years you chose to ignore. After the birthday card, I thought that was the end of it. His olive branch, if you could even call it that, had been accepted, processed, and locked away where it belonged. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. It was closure enough to know he had noticed the success, even if only through the lens of public attention. But just when the dust seemed to be settling, just when I had started rehearsing my TED Talk and finalizing new hires for our European expansion, the second letter arrived. This one wasn't folded quietly into a birthday envelope. It was slipped under the door of my office in an unmarked manila envelope. No postage, no sender. Just my name printed on the front in that same painfully familiar block handwriting. I sat there staring at it, heart steady but cold. I already knew who it was from. There was only one person in my life who delivered silence with such precision. I opened it, expecting more veiled apologies, maybe an attempt to take credit for some of the company's recent growth. But the moment I read the first line, I knew it wasn't anything like that. Vanessa, please do not attend my retirement ceremony. This is not a family event. I appreciate your understanding. I read it 3 times, slowly. No warmth, no explanation. Just 7 words that cracked through the stillness I had worked so hard to build. This wasn't a lapse in communication. This was deliberate exile. A rejection masquerading as formality. There was no reference to the birthday card he had just sent. No acknowledgement of the years I spent trying to connect the dots between us. Just a closed door, sealed with polite detachment. He was retiring after 35 years in the military, a career built on commands and compliance. And now, he had used the last act of that career to send me one final order: stay away. I looked around my office, the glass walls catching sunlight, the whiteboards filled with the future. My name etched on every plaque, every award. And yet, I still felt like that little girl again, standing at the edge of the living room while he polished his medals, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be invited in. But that letter snapped me out of it for good. The moment I placed it beside the birthday card, the full weight of his pattern became undeniable. He didn't want connection, he wanted control. He wanted to curate the narrative of his final salute without the daughter who had built a company he had once tried to claim. So I made a decision. If he didn't want me at the end of his story, then he didn't get to be part of mine. Not in name, not in legacy. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. "It's time," I said. "Remove him from everything. And this time, I want it done before the weekend." No ceremony, no warning, just silence, served back to him exactly the way he always delivered it to me. The call to my lawyer was short. I didn't want explanations or timelines. I wanted action. For years, I had operated with the silent hope that maybe, just maybe, our names on the same paperwork meant something more than shared ink. But the letter, the one telling me to stay away from the most defining moment of his public life, stripped that illusion completely. If he could erase me from his farewell, I could erase him from the empire I built with my own hands. I remember sitting at the boardroom table that evening, long after everyone else had gone home. The city lights were glowing below the tall windows, casting reflections across the table where so many contracts had been signed. I placed the letter in front of me like evidence, and beside it, the original incorporation papers, 2 names listed as founders. Mine first, his second. Back then, I thought putting his name on it was an act of honor, a way to show him that his discipline, his lessons, even his silence, had somehow shaped the foundation I was building. But now it felt like leaving a lock on a door he never intended to open. My lawyer, Melissa, arrived the next morning with the revised documents. She was quiet, professional, careful not to ask why. But I knew she had read the room, the birthday card, the retirement letter, the sudden flurry of legal requests. She slid the new papers toward me and said softly, "Once you sign, it's final. His equity, his voting rights, his legal attachments, they'll all be null." I nodded and picked up the pen. I didn't hesitate. I signed with a steady hand, underlining my name just a little heavier than necessary. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. A decision rooted not in bitterness, but in clarity. He had always treated me like a footnote. Now I was removing his name from the story altogether. The new documents would go into effect immediately. The board had already voted in my favor. There would be no press release, no public fallout, just a quiet revision of truth. Once it was done, Melissa asked if I wanted to send him a notice. I paused for a moment. The old part of me, the one that still wanted him to care, considered it. But then I shook my head. "No," I said. "Let him find out the same way I found out about the ceremony, through silence." I watched as she filed the paperwork, each click of her keyboard like a nail sealing a door shut for good. When she left, I was alone again in the boardroom, but this time it didn't feel lonely. It felt clean, finished. I stood and walked over to the window, watching as a new day broke over the skyline. His name was gone from my company. His shadow had been lifted, and for the first time, the view ahead belonged to me entirely. 3 days after I signed the final documents, a video surfaced online. It wasn't something I orchestrated. I didn't need to. The truth has a way of surfacing when it's ready to be heard. It started with a clip from his retirement ceremony, a shaky phone recording taken by someone in the audience. My father stood at the podium in full uniform, delivering a speech as polished as his medals. But what caught the public's attention wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't say. There was a moment, right near the end, when the MC thanked Colonel Monroe's family for their sacrifice and support. The crowd clapped. My father paused, his face unreadable. Then he simply nodded and moved on without a word. No gesture to the audience, no acknowledgement of a wife, a child, a legacy beyond his own uniform. That pause, brief but heavy, sparked something in viewers. The clip spread across social media like wildfire. "Where's his family?" one comment read. Another added, "He thanked everyone except his daughter. Isn't she that tech CEO?" And just like that, the internet started connecting dots I had carefully left scattered. Articles began resurfacing, my interviews, my company's origin story, the vague mention I'd once made about a father who inspired structure but never intimacy. People remembered the logo change, the rebranding. A few military wives wrote threads about daughters who were invisible behind polished boots and starched collars. The story wasn't just mine anymore. It became a mirror for so many others. I watched it unfold from my apartment, the light of the city flickering through the blinds as headlines popped up across my phone. They called it the silent ceremony. Commentators analyzed the speech. Some defended him, others criticized the emotional vacancy, but no one could ignore that pause, that beat of absence where acknowledgement should have lived. He didn't understand at first. Adam told me he called him the next morning, confused. "What is everyone talking about?" he'd asked. "Why are people dragging my name online?" Adam didn't answer. He just told him to watch the video, to really watch it. I imagine that must have been the first time my father truly saw himself from the outside, not as a soldier, not as a hero, but as a man who stood before the world, decorated and alone, unable to say the name of the one person who had honored him in the most unexpected way by walking away. He never called me, never sent a message, but I didn't expect one. His silence had gone viral, louder than any apology he could have mustered, and I didn't need the internet's approval. I didn't need the public to side with me, but for once, the world saw what I had always known. He wasn't the man he pretended to be, and the absence he taught me to live with had finally shown up on camera, for everyone to see. It was a Thursday afternoon when he walked in. No appointment, no warning, just the quiet shift in air that came when a ghost re-entered the room you'd already sealed off. My assistant, Mia, buzzed my office with a strange tone in her voice. "Vanessa, there's someone here asking to see you. He says he's your father." I didn't answer immediately. I let the words sit there between us like static. I should have said no. I should have told her to ask him to leave. But curiosity, or maybe something more complicated, got the better of me. "Send him in," I said quietly. He walked in like he always had, composed, stiff, deliberate. He wore civilian clothes, but they fit him like a uniform. Everything about him looked the same except for his eyes. They were heavier now, carrying something I couldn't name. Maybe shame, maybe just age. He looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. The shelves lined with awards, the framed articles, the logo with the open path leading into sunrise, the one that replaced his precious eagle. He stood there for a moment before speaking. "You've done well," he said. I stayed seated. "You didn't come here to compliment me." He nodded, as if accepting that. "I came because I saw the video, the reaction, the press, the backlash. I didn't expect it to become all that." I folded my hands on the desk. "You didn't expect your silence to finally be loud?" His face tightened. "That wasn't my intention. I didn't want to bring you into something that wasn't about you." "But I was already in it," I said, my voice sharper now. "I was in it the day I put your name on the company, the day I asked you to believe in me, the day you gave my business pitch to someone else and pretended like it was yours." He didn't deny it, he didn't defend it. That stunned me more than if he had. "I made mistakes," he finally said, each word slow, like he was trying them on for the first time. "I didn't know how to be what you needed." I stood up, not out of anger, but because I needed to look him in the eye from my own height now. "You didn't have to know. You just had to try." He nodded again. The room felt impossibly quiet. He looked at the chair across from me but didn't sit down. "I'm not asking to fix things. I just wanted to see it for myself, what you built." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Then look, and understand that you're not a part of it anymore." He looked around once more, not with pride, with recognition. Then he turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him. And for the first time, he walked out of a room I owned without taking anything with him, not even my need. He left without saying goodbye, just a nod, the soft sound of the door closing, and silence. I thought that was the last time I would ever see him. I was ready for that. I had accepted that not all stories get neat resolutions. But the universe, it seems, doesn't always let us walk away so cleanly. A week later, Adam called me. His voice was hesitant. "He was in an accident," he said. "Minor. He's fine. Just a sprained wrist and a few bruises. But I went to pick him up from the clinic and something happened." I sat down, my stomach already turning. "What?" He dropped his wallet. When I handed it back to him, something fell out. A photo of you. I said nothing. It was folded like he'd kept it for years. One of those press photos of you at the company launch. The one with the ribbon cutting. I remembered that day vividly, the ribbon fluttering in the breeze, the weight of 1,000 doubts lifting from my shoulders as I held the scissors and smiled. I had never sent him that photo. Adam continued. There was writing on the back, just 4 words. She did it anyway. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the sting of tears I thought had already dried. He kept it with him, Adam said quietly, through deployments, through everything. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to dismiss it as too little, too late. But something about that folded picture, hidden in the quiet pocket of his wallet, undid something in me. Because while he never said the words aloud, he had carried them, and maybe that's all he ever knew how to do. Maybe that was his way of loving, quiet, clumsy, incomplete. I sat there long after the call ended, holding my phone in one hand and my breath in the other. The same man who sent a letter telling me not to come to his retirement had also kept a photo of me close to his heart for what looked like years. He had erased me in public but carried me in private. It didn't excuse anything, but it complicated everything. Later that night, I pulled open the drawer where I had stored his letter, the birthday card, and the original incorporation papers. I added a printed copy of that photo to the pile, with those 4 words written on the back in my own handwriting now. Not to forgive him, not yet, but to remember. He had said so little, but he had written something. Not in boardrooms, not in speeches, but in silence and in ink and in a worn photo tucked between receipts and ID cards. And for the first time, I didn't know whether to mourn that or be grateful it existed at all. The moment sat with me for days. That folded photo, those 4 words, and the silence that stretched between what we said and what we carried. I couldn't stop thinking about it. She did it anyway. A strange kind of pride buried in secrecy. It didn't fix the years. It didn't undo the letter. But it opened something in me I wasn't ready for. A door that had been bolted shut by disappointment now swinging slightly on its hinges. So I did something unexpected. I invited him back. No audience, no assistant, no legal team. Just me and him in the boardroom he once walked through like a stranger. I didn't even tell Adam. I didn't want advice. I didn't want strategy. I just wanted space. He arrived 10 minutes early, of course. Still on military time, still precise. He wore the same jacket from the last visit, and for a second, I wondered if the photo was still in his wallet. He sat across from me, hands folded, eyes guarded. I took a breath and leaned forward. I know about the photo, I said. He blinked, just once, then nodded slowly. Adam told you. His voice didn't carry the usual weight. It was quieter, stripped of the command it used to cling to. I nodded. Why did you keep it? He didn't speak right away. He reached into his wallet and pulled it out, gently placing the creased picture between us like it was sacred. Because I knew I'd never be able to say it right. But that day, I watched the live stream. I saw you cut the ribbon. I saw your name on the building. I saw that everyone else finally saw you too. My throat tightened. I didn't expect it to feel like this. I had come prepared to let him speak, maybe even to say a few final words and close the chapter. But the moment felt different. Heavy in a way I couldn't name. I looked at the photo, then at him. I built this without you, but I still hoped you'd show up. His gaze didn't shift. I know, and I failed at that. Every single time. I didn't know how to father you without trying to fix you, and you didn't need fixing. You needed someone who saw you exactly as you were. I missed that, over and over. The words hung between us. I didn't rush to forgive him, but I didn't shut down either. I just breathed. Then I said what I had wanted to say for years. You hurt me in ways I'm still unpacking, but I'm here, and I'm not angry anymore, just tired of wondering why I wasn't enough. He looked at me, eyes full now. You were always more than enough. I just wasn't ready to admit it. And for the first time, the boardroom wasn't about business. It was about truth. And maybe, just maybe, something close to healing. A month passed after that conversation in the boardroom. We didn't become close. We didn't suddenly fall into a rhythm of weekly calls or shared dinners. But something shifted. The silence between us was no longer a void. It had become space to breathe, to process, to accept that our story was never going to be tidy, but didn't have to remain broken. I didn't tell him everything I had held back over the years. He didn't offer detailed apologies or dramatic gestures, but the door was no longer locked. It was open, just a crack, and sometimes that's all grace requires. When our fiscal year closed, the company had once again exceeded every projection. We were entering a new phase, one that would take us global. Legal met with me to finalize the year's dividends and distributions. And there it was, still sitting on the balance sheet, his small portion of founder's equity, the one we hadn't dissolved in monetary terms, only in name. My team had expected me to cash it out into a holding account or reinvest it internally, but I didn't do that. I signed it over to him. When I passed the final check to Melissa, our legal counsel, she paused. "You sure?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "This could be a clean break." "I'm sure," I said. "I didn't do it because he earned it. I didn't do it because I needed him to feel included. I did it because I didn't want to carry the bitterness anymore. That check wasn't about him, it was about me. I had built this company without him, yes, but a part of me had also spent too many years using his absence as fuel. It had worked, it had driven me, but I didn't want it to be the reason anymore. I didn't want to be powerful because I was proving something. I wanted to be powerful because I had learned to let go. I signed the check, slid it across the table, and asked that it be sent without a note. No explanation, no message, just the balance he was owed. He would see my name in the signature line. That would be enough. Later that night, I sat alone in my office, lights low, city quiet. I pulled out the folded photo one more time, the one he carried all those years. "She did it anyway," he had written, and he was right. I did. Not because he helped, not because he believed, but because somewhere deep down I decided I was worth building something for, even if no one ever clapped for me at the end. The check would clear, the chapter would close, and my name, no longer paired with his, would still be rising, not out of revenge, but out of peace. When people ask me now why I removed my father's name from the company, I don't give them the drama. I don't tell them about the letter, the stolen pitch, or the boardroom silence. I simply say, because I finally knew who built it. And that changes everything. The real power reversal didn't happen when I signed him out of the company. It happened when I no longer needed his permission to exist. That's when I stopped chasing his approval and started standing in my own authority. Ironically, the world noticed more after I let him go. The press shifted their focus from the military lineage to the story of a woman who rose, not because of legacy, but in spite of it. Forbes listed us in their top 10 female-led tech companies of the year. CNN called it one of the most emotionally honest founder journeys we've ever featured. I didn't script that attention. It came because people saw themselves in the story. Daughters, sons, entrepreneurs, anyone who had ever loved someone who couldn't love them back the way they needed. If you're watching this and you've been carrying the weight of someone's silence, I want you to hear me. You don't have to earn what should have been freely given. You don't have to shrink to keep someone comfortable. You are allowed to build the life they never clapped for, and then walk into every room like they did. He once tried to erase me with silence, but now I've made peace with that. Because when he said, "Don't come," what he didn't know was I was already on my way somewhere much bigger, and I arrived. This story may have ended, but the message lingers. For more raw and real moments like this, click on the left and subscribe to walk alongside more women finding their strength. Healing takes time, but it's possible.